The sound of the silver fork striking the fine porcelain felt like a mercy shot in the heavy silence of the restaurant. Julian Vane could not taste what he was eating. He could only feel the weight of power. Sitting in front of him, at the top of that skyscraper in Chicago, was Elena Thorne, the woman he believed to be the safe harbor of his chaotic life. The Belgian chocolate cake, decorated with gold leaves, sat there, untouched, waiting for the first bite that would seal Julian's fate. He lifted the utensil, his eyes fixed on Elena's, who smiled with a sweetness that hid an abyss. But before the dessert touched his lips, chaos invaded the luxury. A girl, with very dark skin glowing under the LED lights and a hoodie 3 times bigger than her body, appeared out of nowhere. She wasn't running. She was flying between the tables, dodging the waiters, as if she knew every inch of that glass labyrinth. The security guards moved in, but she was faster. She stopped just a breath away from Julian, her eyes wide, her chest rising and falling with an urgency that did not belong in that sterile environment. "Drop that. They put something in your cake," she shouted, her voice tearing through the ambient classical music. Julian froze. Time seemed to stretch. The first great mystery was right there. How did a child who lived in the shadows of the South Side know what was happening in the most exclusive kitchen in the city? Julian's reaction was not fear, it was contempt. He looked at the girl's dirty hands, Kira, and then at Elena's flawless face. Who let this intruder in? Julian snarled, his tone loaded with a prejudice he no longer even tried to hide. He had always felt untouchable, and Kira's presence, there was a glitch in the system. But Elena, for a second, lost her color. Her hands, which had been calmly resting on the table, gripped the napkin with disproportionate force. Kira did not back down. She pointed at Elena with a trembling but firm finger. "I saw her in the staff hallway. I saw the blue vial." She told the waiter it was a special seasoning, but the smell was bitter medicine. The entire restaurant stopped to watch the spectacle of the fall. Julian, driven by an instinct he himself did not understand, lowered the fork. He did not believe the girl, but he knew fear, and fear was written all over his fiancé's face. "Shut up, you liar," Elena shouted, her voice rising an octave, losing all the elegance it had taken years to build. "Julian, are you going to listen to a street child instead of me?" The billionaire looked at the cake. He felt a stab in his chest, a sudden sadness upon realizing that the woman he was going to propose to that night might wish for his funeral instead of his ring. The tension rose to unbearable levels when Julian, in a calculated and cold move, pushed the plate toward Elena. "If she's lying, prove it. You eat it," he said, his voice icy. The silence that followed was the confirmation of a betrayal Julian had never imagined. Elena did not touch the cake. She simply looked at Julian with a hatred that turned her face into a grotesque mask. She knew the game was over right there. But what Julian did not know was that Kira had a much more personal reason to be there than just saving a stranger. Why would a girl who barely had anything to eat risk her own life to save the man who was trying to demolish the tenement where she lived? Julian felt an overwhelming rage, not only because of Elena's betrayal, but because he realized his life was a house of cards. He looked at Kira, who was now being held by the shoulders by a burly security guard. "Let her go," he ordered, his voice coming out like thunder. He stood up, the chair scraping loudly against the floor. He took the cake, called the head of security, and ordered them to take it immediately for laboratory analysis, while Elena was escorted to a private room. The billionaire, the man who ruled the city, felt small in the face of the courage of that girl he had always ignored on the streets. Kira looked at him, not with gratitude, but with a seriousness that haunted Julian. She had fulfilled her mission, but the story was far from over. What happened 2 hours later at the police station would change Julian's perception of who his real enemies were. If you are enjoying this story and want to know what Kira is hiding, don't forget to subscribe to the channel and like the video. It is very important for us to know what you think. So leave your opinion in the comments below and tell us which city or country you're watching this video from. The truth behind that poison is much deeper than a simple crime of passion, and what Julian is about to discover about his own family will leave you breathless. As the blue and red lights of the police cars reflected off the tempered glass of the restaurant, Julian Vane felt the weight of a world he no longer recognized. He was sitting in the back seat of his armored car, watching Elena being led away in handcuffs, still maintaining a posture of absolute coldness. The police emergency lab had already confirmed it. The dose of cyanide diluted in the chocolate sauce was enough to stop the heart of a man Julian's size in less than 5 minutes. The anger he felt now was turning into a dark curiosity. Elena did not have the intellect to devise such a clean and technical plan. She was the arm, but who was the mind? The first major narrative loop closed only to open a larger wound. The blue vial Kira had mentioned bore the seal of a pharmaceutical lab that Julian himself had shut down due to bankruptcy 3 years earlier. Julian turned his gaze to Kira, who was sitting in the front seat, curled up in the hoodie. He realized the girl was not shivering from the cold, but from an exhaustion that seemed to come from her soul. When they arrived at the police station, the scene changed. The detective, a man named Elias who owed Julian favors, brought a preliminary report. The woman won't talk, Julian. She knows she has protection, but what we found in her history will give you nightmares. Elena Thorne was not Elena Thorne. Her real name was Sarah Miller, daughter of a former partner, Julian, who had taken his own life after an aggressive merger led by Julian. The betrayal was not financial. It was a blood revenge that had been simmering on low heat for almost a decade. The moment of strong emotion in this chapter came when Kira, for the first time, lifted her head and spoke directly to Julian in the waiting room. "Do you think I saved you because you're special?" she asked, with a bluntness that made the billionaire recoil. "I saved you because your mother used to give me food every morning when I was at the shelter next to your company. She said you had lost your way, but that you still had a heart. I did this for her, not for you." Julian felt a stab of guilt that no amount of money could ease. He had neglected his own mother in the last years of her life, focusing only on expanding his empire of steel and glass, not knowing that she spent her small pension feeding the children of the very people he had harmed. The investigation into Sarah's, or Elena's, past revealed that she had been receiving massive deposits from an offshore account linked to Julian's own brother, Marcus Vane. The real antagonist was not in the restaurant. He was on the company's board of directors, waiting for the news of Julian's death to take over as president. Marcus's hatred for his brother was fueled by years of living in his shadow and mediocrity, and he had used Sarah's desire for revenge as the perfect weapon. The plan was brilliant. Julian would die, Sarah would be arrested as the obvious culprit, and Marcus would inherit the throne without a single drop of blood on his hands. Meanwhile, Julian began to realize that Kira was not just an eyewitness. The second intriguing mystery emerged when he noticed the girl drawing complex symbols on a piece of paper while waiting. They were security diagrams, escape routes, and shift change schedules of Vane Industries. How would a street child have access to intelligence that would cost millions on the black market? Kira's answer was short. People don't look down, Julian. They don't see who cleans the tables, who takes out the trash, or who sleeps on the sidewalk. We hear everything. We are the walls of this city. Julian's anger now had a clear target. He was no longer the businessman trying to save his image. He was a man being hunted within his own family. He looked at Kira and saw in her what Marcus and Sarah never did. An ally made invisible by the system, but made lethal by survival. "They're going to come after you now, Kira. You know too much," Julian warned, his tone shifting from arrogance to genuine protection. He realized that the girl's life was tied to his by a thread of fate that he himself had helped weave through his social neglect. The development of the conflict reached its peak when Marcus's lawyers arrived at the police station, not to defend Julian, but to ensure that Kira's testimony would be invalidated because she was a minor and lived on the streets. They tried to intimidate her, offering money and making threats by calling Child Protective Services to take her to a closed institution. It was the first moment Julian saw the true face of the corporation he had built, a machine that crushes people. He stood up, placed himself between the lawyers and the girl, and said the words that would change everything. "She's not going anywhere. She is under my personal custody." The block ends with Julian leaving the police station holding Kira's hand, while the flashes of reporters lit up the pale face of the billionaire. He knew Marcus was already aware that the plan had failed. His brother would not stay still. He would activate the contingency plan. Julian smelled something burning in the air, and it was not just an expression. In the distance, he saw thick smoke rising from the neighborhood where Kira's shelter was located. Marcus was trying to erase the evidence and the witnesses that Kira represented. The war was no longer in courtrooms or at gala dinners. The war was now in the streets, and Julian Vane would have to learn to fight in the dark if he wanted to survive until dawn. The shelter burning on the horizon was the sign that Marcus Vane was no longer playing to win, but to destroy. Julian felt the heat of betrayal burn hotter than the fire itself. As he drove toward the secret command center he kept in an old port warehouse. He could not return his penthouse. Every security camera at Vane Industries now belonged to his brother. The first moment of strong emotion in this segment occurred when Kira, looking at the reflection of the fire in the car window, let a single tear fall. "Everything I had was in there, Julian. My drawings, the photo of my mother. He burned my story." Julian said nothing, but tightened his grip on the steering wheel until his knuckles turned white. He realized that, to save himself, he would first need to restore the dignity he had taken from that girl. Julian's secret preparation began in the basement of the warehouse, a technological bunker he had built years earlier in case of aggressive industrial espionage. While the world believed the billionaire was hiding and terrified, Julian was, in fact, operating in the shadows. The third intriguing mystery emerged when he opened a safe camouflaged in the wall and pulled out not gold bars, but a set of cryptographic keys that belonged to his mother. "She was the real mind behind our security, Kira. Marcus thinks he inherited the empire, but he only inherited the shell. The master system key was never with the board." Julian began typing lines of code that were not taught in universities. It was a proprietary programming language based on sound frequencies that his mother had developed. While Julian worked on the software, he gave Kira a task that no one else could carry out. He handed her a high-sensitivity listening device and a map of the ventilation shafts of the company headquarters. "They expect me to send hackers or lawyers. They'll never expect a shadow to come through the pipes." The rising action was tense. Julian monitored Kira through a subdermal GPS as she infiltrated the 80-story building through the maintenance system. The risk was total. If Marcus captured her, Julian would lose his only witness and his only connection to humanity. The girl's courage, driven by a mix of thirst for justice and loyalty to the memory of Elisa Vane, was the fuel that kept Julian focused. Inside the bunker, Julian executed the first phase of his silent retaliation. Instead of freezing Marcus's accounts, he began feeding them false data. He created a trail of digital breadcrumbs that made it appear the assassination plan was being financed by a foreign cartel, directly linking Marcus's personal transactions to international criminal activity. It was a trap of mirrors. Julian was using his brother's own greed to hang him. The fourth mystery of the plot was revealed here. Marcus didn't just want the money. He was selling the family's biotechnology patents to a paramilitary group. The poison in the chocolate cake was only the final test of a new chemical weapon Marcus intended to commercialize on a global scale. The atmosphere in the bunker was that of a Cold War. Julian watched Marcus's radio transmissions, as he was already calling an emergency board meeting to declare Julian mentally unfit and take full control. He thinks silence is my end, Julian murmured to the empty screens. But silence is where I work best. Kira, through the communicator, sent an audio signal from the main office. She had managed to plant the bug. Marcus's voice echoed through the room, cold and devoid of any remorse. Make sure the girl is not found. The fire at the shelter was a warning, but the next one will be the final point. Julian's anger reached its peak, but he turned it into technical precision. Julian's preparation involved something beyond technology. He began contacting the former employees he himself had fired, the invisibles Kira had mentioned. He used what remained of his personal fortune to ensure they were positioned at strategic points throughout the city. They were his eyes and ears. The billionaire was learning that true power did not come from the top of the pyramid, but from the base that supports it. He was assembling an army of people the system had discarded, all united by the same purpose: to bring down the man who treated them like statistics. Kira, from the top of the building, confirmed that the central servers were vulnerable. The stage for the climax was set. The twist that was beginning to take shape was that Julian did not intend only to arrest Marcus. He intended to expose the entire structure of corruption that allowed men like his brother to operate above the law. He was preparing a total leak, a protocol his mother called Judgment Day. If he pressed that button, his own company would be destroyed, its shares would be worth zero, and his fortune would evaporate. It would be the ultimate sacrifice. He looked at the screen, waiting for Kira's signal to begin the final phase of the infiltration. The girl was now just a few meters from the office where Marcus celebrated his premature victory with a glass of expensive whiskey. The segment ends with Julian Vane holding his finger over the execution key. He looked at the photo of his mother on the improvised table and then at the green dot on the map that represented Kira. He knew that, by the end of that night, he might no longer be a billionaire, and he might end up in a cell next to his brother for all the negligence he had committed in the past. But for the first time in years, he did not feel fear. He felt that he was finally coming home. Kira, get out of there now. The frequency is about to begin. The sound of a low-frequency alarm began to vibrate through the bunker, signaling that justice, raw and impartial, was about to be served on a plate far more bitter than the chocolate cake. The low-frequency vibration that Julian triggered from the bunker was not just a sound signal. It was the beginning of the end of the Vane Empire. On the 80th floor of the corporate headquarters, the lights began to flicker in a frantic pattern, and Marcus, holding his whiskey, felt the ground tremble beneath his feet of arrogance. Kira, slipping through the ventilation ducts with the agility of someone who learned to survive in the cracks of society, reached the central server room. The climax began when she connected Julian's device directly to the Iron Heart, the computer that managed all of the company's global transactions. The first unexpected twist happened at that moment. The system did not ask for a password, it asked for a voice sample. Julian, from the bunker, recited the poem his mother used to read to him before bed. The biometric security that Marcus swore he had hacked never belonged to digital codes, but to Elise's emotional memory. Justice began to be carried out in a devastating and public way. While Marcus desperately tried to understand why his access was being denied, the giant screens on the building's facade, facing the busiest avenue in the city, abruptly changed. Instead of luxury advertisements, they began to display the contract for the sale of chemical weapons and the audio recordings captured by Kira, in which Marcus ordered the fire at the shelter. The city stopped. Thousands of people in the streets looked up, watching the mask of the philanthropist, Marcus Vane, melt in real time. In the bunker, Julian felt a mix of relief and dread. He was destroying the legacy of his life to save his soul. The anger he had felt in the restaurant was now a surgical coldness. Marcus, realizing that the trap was closing in, drew a gun and ran toward the server room, suspecting that someone was inside the building. The moment of intense emotion occurred when Julian, through the security cameras, saw his brother point the gun at the ventilation grate where Kira was hiding. "I know you're there, you little rat," Marcus shouted, his voice distorted by madness. Julian felt his heart stop. He could not lose the girl. She was the only real thing he had left. "Marcus, stop!" Julian's voice echoed through the room's speakers, sounding like a ghost. "The money is gone. The accounts are empty. If you pull that trigger, you'll have nothing left to buy your silence." The second unexpected twist came when Sarah Miller, the false Elena, appeared at the door of the room, escorted not by the police, but by the former employees Julian had recruited. She had not gone to the police station. She had been intercepted and, upon seeing the evidence against Marcus, decided she would not fall alone. "He promised me your father would be avenged." "Julian," Sarah shouted, crying. "But he only wanted to use our pain to feed his own." She handed Julian, through an encrypted network, access to Marcus's personal files, revealing that the brother planned to kill Sarah right after Julian's funeral. Marcus's betrayal had no limits. He was a predator who devoured his own allies. Justice was completed when the police, pressured by the crowd that surrounded the building after the revelations on the giant screens, stormed the floor. Marcus, cornered between the exposed truth and Sarah's betrayal, tried to escape through the helipad, but Kira had already blocked the elevators and emergency exits. The girl came out of the ventilation duct, stopping in front of the man who had tried to burn her alive. She had no weapons, only Julian's phone broadcasting everything live to the world. "You thought I was invisible," Kira said, her voice firm and calm. "But it's the shadows that see best what is hidden in the dark." Marcus fell to his knees, not out of remorse, but out of total defeat. His name was now synonymous with global infamy. Julian, from the bunker, watched his brother be handcuffed and taken away under the lights of the media helicopters. He felt a bitter satisfaction. He had executed the plan perfectly, but the cost was his own financial ruin. The climax reached its final point when Julian activated the self-destruction protocol for the biotechnology data. Years of research, billions of dollars in chemical weapon patents, all turned into useless zeros and ones in a matter of seconds. He was clearing his mother's name and ensuring that no one else would die from the Vane poison. Julian's justice was not just about arresting the guilty. It was about dismantling the machine that created the guilt. Kira left the building carried in the arms of one of the security guards who had once chased her, but now saw her as a hero. Julian waited for her at the secret exit of the warehouse. When the two met, the silence between them said more than any speech. Justice had been served, but the scars remained. Marcus was behind bars. Sarah was cooperating with the authorities to reduce her sentence. And Vane Industries was now a bankrupt mass of assets that would be liquidated to compensate the victims of Marcus's plans. Julian looked at the girl and realized that the most important twist was not his brother's downfall, but his own rise as a human being capable of feeling empathy. The segment ends with Julian and Kira watching the sun rise over the ruins of what was once the pride of the family. The smoke from the shelter still lingered in the air, but now it mixed with the morning mist, symbolizing a new beginning. The billionaire and the street girl were now the two most famous people in the country, but to them, none of that mattered. They had survived the longest night of their lives and were ready to face the judgment that would come next. Julian knew that his journey of redemption was only just beginning, and that true justice would require much more than simply exposing a villain. It would require him to build something new from the ashes of the past. The ashes of Vane Industries were still floating in Chicago's air when the sun finally settled on the horizon. But for Julian, the shine of gold now seemed dull compared to the light in Kira's eyes. The resolution of that night did not end with Marcus's arrest. It began when Julian signed the final document for the liquidation of his assets. He was not just paying debts. He was dismantling his former identity. The first moment of strong emotion in this final chapter occurred on the former side of the shelter, where Julian and Kira stood before a construction site. "We're not just going to rebuild walls, Kira," Julian said, handing her an architectural plan that included not only rooms, but educational labs and technology centers for young people like her. "This place is yours now." From the Elisa Vane Foundation. The powerful moral lesson of the story revealed itself when the city's former invisibles, the people Kira had mentioned at the beginning of the journey, began to approach spontaneously. They did not want charity. They wanted to take part in the construction. Julian learned that true security does not come from armored walls or encrypted systems, but from the network of support that empathy builds. He, who once saw the city from the top of a skyscraper as a board of profit, now saw it as a living organism that needed care. Julian's redemption was complete at the moment he gave up total control to become just another brick in that new structure. Justice was not only about punishing evil, but about cultivating the good that had been suffocated by greed. The satisfaction of justice was consolidated months later, during the final trial. Marcus Vane was sentenced to 3 decades in prison, without the possibility of parole, while Sarah Miller received a reduced sentence that included mandatory community service at Julian's foundation. The empire of fear had fallen, and upon its ruins, a new form of power emerged, the power of transparency. Julian legally adopted Kira, not as an act of charity, but because he realized the girl was the moral compass he had lost long ago. On the day the adoption was finalized, they returned to the Penthouse 88 restaurant, which now belonged to a new group of ethical investors. Sitting at the same table where it all began, Julian looked at the menu and smiled. There was no longer the tension of the past, only the lightness of someone who knows that truth is the best protection. Kira, now wearing clothes that fit her perfectly, but maintaining the same flame of courage in her eyes, ordered a slice of chocolate cake. "Are you sure?" Julian joked. Kira laughed, a sound Julian never thought he would hear. "This time, I watched the chef prepare it myself," she replied. The symbolic cycle of the story closed when a little girl, very similar to what Kira once was, passed by their table selling flowers. Kira bought them all and handed them to Julian, saying, "For your mother's memory." She was right about you. The moral lesson that remains is that a man's character is not measured by what he builds when he is at the top, but by what he protects when he is at the bottom. Julian Vance lost billions, but gained a family and a purpose. He discovered that the most dangerous poison is not the one placed in the cake, but the indifference we allow to grow in our hearts. If you made it this far, and this story of transformation and justice touched your heart, don't forget to subscribe to the channel and like the video to support our work. It is very rewarding to see how these narratives reach people from so many different places. So leave a comment below with what you thought about Julian's lesson and Kira's courage. And don't forget to say which city or country you're watching the video from. The story of Julian and Kira became an urban legend in Chicago, a reminder that walls have ears and that justice can come from the most unexpected place. The billionaire and the street girl proved that when privilege joins survival, the impossible becomes reality. Julian now dedicates his days to teaching corporate ethics and expanding the foundation, while Kira prepares to become the future mind that will lead the city with the wisdom that only the streets can teach. They showed that no one is invisible by choice, and that everyone deserves to be seen. The night of betrayal was only the preface to a life of meaning, where each sunrise is an opportunity to honor those the system tried to erase. In the end, the chocolate cake was not Julian's end, but the necessary ingredient for his awakening. Life, at times, needs a bitter shock so that we can value what is truly sweet. Marcus Vane rots in his cell, surrounded by the silence he himself created, while Julian and Kira walk under the city lights, no longer as master and protected, but as partners in a silent revolution of kindness. The story ends with the two of them watching the sunset from the top of the new shelter, knowing that true wealth cannot be stolen, poisoned, or burned. It lives in the loyalty of those who warned us about danger when we had nothing to offer in return. Julian and Kira's journey ends here, but the impact of their actions continues to resonate throughout the metropolis. They prove that courage is contagious and that truth, once set free, can never be imprisoned again. Julian Vance finally found the peace that money could never buy, and Kira found the home the world tried to deny her. Together, they are living proof that justice, when carried out with love and integrity, has the power to heal even the deepest wounds. And so, under the starry sky of a renewed Chicago, the story of the girl who warned the millionaire becomes a beacon of hope for all those who still struggle to be seen and heard.